Today I wanted to have a quick chat on what it would take to host something like a Quen 3.8 Max. We just talked about this model being released yesterday. It's a 2.4 trillion parameter model. And I mentioned in the video that it would be fairly unreasonable for most individual persons or enterprises to host this on their own infrastructure. And I wanted to see what that actually entailed if I, let's say, came across a few $100 million and wanted to spend some of that money, to host something like this locally. Obviously, I don't think that's happening anytime soon, but I was just curious and I wanted to see, just for the memes and the giggles, what it would take. So I was able to find this article here from AIToolsRecap.com, and I'll link this down below in the description so you can take a read. This is not Quen 3.8 Max because the open weight model has not been released. However, this details what it would take to host something that's slightly larger at a 2.8 trillion versus a 2.4 trillion parameter model. This was also released recently. It is huge. It's a huge model and it works really, really well. I've been doing some testing on this with some of my Hermes agents, and it works really, really well. And it's fairly cheap, at least compared to like Opus 5 and ChatGPT Soul and things like that, when I'm doing a little more of the complicated stuff that I can't do locally. Obviously, it has a 1,000,000 token context window, which is great. It's similar to the frontier models that are currently existing out there now. It is a Chinese based model, and as this article does disclose, Moonshot AI is a Chinese company, and Chinese national intelligence law requires Chinese companies to cooperate with the government intelligence requests. So this is a no-go immediately for things like finance, healthcare, and legal. Obviously, anything in the US or the EU has strict kind of policies against sharing and giving data to the Chinese government directly, as they are a direct adversary. And this would be kind of the only option if you don't want to pay for a service, if you want to self-host and be completely in the clear for doing so. So let's take a look at the size. So a full quantization of Kimi K3 is 5.6 terabytes, which just with the prices of current storage, that alone is pretty wild. The VRAM needed gets insane, 5,600 gigabytes plus needed. GPU's recommendation are the H100 80 gigabyte models, and you need 100 of those. That will give you reference quality, which is essentially saying it's essentially the same thing as what is expected if they hosted themselves. Just to give you an idea how expensive this is going to be, 100 H100 80 gigabytes at current pricing, I just did a quick search for what these would cost. They're like $27,000, $30,000, $40,000 depending on if they're used or new or in package or bundles, etc., etc. So they're insanely expensive. So you need 100 of those. Quantization allows you to kind of scale the model down and host it a little bit more manageably. Quantization on its own is its own topic, and it's very complicated. Note that a quantization still leaves it kind of out of the realm of possibility for most people. You do have the size of the actual model itself, which is never really the concern. The concern is always the VRAM required. At 2,800 gigabytes, again, that's an insane amount of VRAM that most people don't have laying in their backyard. Not to mention the power requirements and the noise and the cooling and the water. This is data centers only, right? So you need 35 H100s, and then you get near lossless performance locally. And then you have the Q4 quantization that gives you a much smaller model. It's about one fifth the size. Same thing with the VRAM requirement, and then you start getting into lower 2-digit numbers for GPU requirements. It says this is the sweet spot. It is trained on MXFP4 Aware, and I think this is what most people are going to be seeing as far as what might be available very shortly from US providers. And then you have Q2. Q2 is usually something that most of these larger model providers that are open weights to allow you to kind of squeeze into something that would be reasonable for maybe enterprise or a very rich individual to be able to host, right? Like 900 gigabyte H100s, 80 gigabyte GPUs may be in the reach for some people that are like very wealthy or are doing a lot of research that might require this as a means of absolute, secrecy or reliance off of services, third-party providers, or obviously mainland China. However, you will obviously see meaningful quality loss expected. So yeah, this just shows how crazy these models are getting, and the fact that it is publicly available and able to be downloaded does not necessarily mean that we can actually afford to host it locally. This differs a lot from like Qwen 3.6 27B, which was a much smaller quantized model that allowed us to do very rudimentary things. This is a frontier size model, and you can see that by the requirements to be able to actually host it. Obviously, if you don't want to deal with the hardware or the RAM or the GPUs or the water issues or the noise and temperatures and all that stuff, you can consider running stuff in AWS. I've never even seen these instances, so I don't even know how you would get access to these on AWS. This is a P548X extra large AX H100 80 gigabytes times 3. So this is a mouthful, and it's going to roughly run you about $100 an hour on demand, with the spot reserve of between $40 to $55 an hour reserve. It does some kind of details here down below on what the reserve is. So it might be reasonable for a company that is large enough that does want to leverage AI at a much cheaper way and still use something like Frontier and be compliant to host this on infrastructure in the US or the EU, and then end up paying slightly less for token cost. It does recommend a stack here. This is what actually kind of serves whatever model you're currently running and hosting. And it does have some disclaimers here, which is wait for managed hosting, which is what most people are going to do, because no one really has the infrastructure to run this easily unless you're a massive multi-100 million billion-dollar corporation. Together AI Fireworks AI replicate and likely offer managed K13 interface at competitive per token rates on Western infrastructure. So yeah, this is what I was saying earlier, that most likely as this release gets more traction, these providers will end up setting up infrastructure that will avoid having to reach mainland China for the communication to the API. This gives you US data residency without managing your own cluster. Check with these providers on these dates. And if we look on OpenRouter now, let's search Kimi K3. Kimi K3. Let's see what's currently available. So it's around $3. So it's very similar to the pricing you would go. And here's Fireworks. And let's see what the data policy is. Training prompt, they have a zero retention policy. Bring your own tokens. I wonder if you can see specifically where they're hosted here. 9 models, terms of service. Wow, that's a lot of reading. Let's check a different one. Thought there was some disclosure on region. Oh, here it is. Region US. Perfect. So yeah, this is a US based Kimi K3 hosted solution at an input price of $3 and output price of $15. So if you look at Kimi K3's API, Kimi K3 API cost, let's see, you were directly to buy through them, should be the same cost, right? There's a token estimator. Where do we find the pricing? Kimi K3, yeah. So input price cash hit 30 cents, input price cash miss $3, and output price 15. So yeah, so the pricing doesn't change whether you go to mainland China or whether you use a provider like on OpenRouter. You're essentially paying the same thing. So yeah, it's good to know. The licensing term, yep, same thing as the Qwen 3.8 Max. The official license has not been confirmed as of July 2025. DeepSeek v4 used MIT weights, and then some other stuff about licensing. K3 was trained on MX FP4 quantization awareness, which means Q4 degradation should be lower than models without this. So that's why they highlighted that is the sweet spot. So that's good to know. But yeah, I don't even know how much this money would be. I don't even want to do the math. Let's just do some ballpark figures here. If we take 100 GPUs times, let's say, let's be gracious, let's do 120 GPUs for some little bit of headroom, assuming that we get all the hardware racks and everything for free. And then let's multiply that times, oops, I realize you can't see the screen, but let's multiply that by, let's do the average of 25K. How much money is that? 25K, you're looking at a cheap price of, let's count the zeros, three. So you need at least $3 million in just GPUs alone, which is just crazy. Not to mention the power draw, the CPUs, the requirement for storage, networking, electricity, locations. So conservatively, that's what you need to host a model like Kimi K3. And to be fair, if you're spending $1 million plus a month on your subscription with these OpenAI models, it might make sense, but for most people, it won't make sense. Again, this is the sweet spot for most. All right, so let's say that you did go down to the Q4 quantization and you needed let's say 20 H100s. Let's see, you need 20. Looking at, a cool, easy 500K in just GPUs. So yeah, maybe $1 million, $2 million. If you have enough users, enough payback time, who knows, maybe that might be within reason. So yeah, this is a fun little exercise trying to understand what it would take to actually host some of these new Chinese models. It turns out insanely expensive, and I think most people will end up doing what this website says, which is wait for managed hosting in the right region if you don't want to hit the API of mainland China. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Subscribe, like the video, do all that, and I'll come out with the video tomorrow. Thanks.